Us back to the beginning. How did you discover your passion for storytelling and the arts?
Yeah. I grew up in originally in South Denver, but then moved to small town Texas in middle school. And so that's kind of like where my adolescence and formative years were spent. And so it was never really much of a thing down there. I was too worried about like figuring out what like football meant. So like try and try and like focus on like, oh, do I have a passion for the arts? But my sister was actually always really into it, and she was kind of the one who sort of like dove headfirst. And so for me, I was always just kind of tangentially related to these things. It's like small town community theater, they always need boys. And so I would like do a couple of these shows, but it's always just like something fun to do in the summers. Or um it was never really a thing until sort of my junior year of high school. It's so funny because I remember this happening while I was doing it, but our community theater was doing a production of Man of La Mancha, which I don't know if you know. It's a musical adaptation of Don Quixote, and it's a beautiful score. And I never really like heard it before. And being in Texas and being a man in Texas, right, you start to feel very dissociated from your own emotions. And something about the music and that show like carved something out inside of me. And I just remember thinking like, I need to chase this feeling. Like I need to create this feeling in other people. I don't know what it is. I need to figure it out. And so so it was just kind of this light bulb that turned on, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna see like how do people do act, like how like how do people figure this out. And so I just did like a little bit of, I mean, it was like me and my mom like looking on the computer like what are good schools for music theater, and that was kind of like, all right, let's see where this takes me. And that's kind of still where I am.
Well, that actually might be the answer to this next question. But when you look at your career as a whole,
Yeah.
who or what has had the biggest influence, either personally or professionally?
Yeah. I mean, definitely, like, yeah, that sort of like support system around me has been huge. I could not, I mean, truly, as a parent, like to let your child pursue the arts is brave. And but my dad, like he his family didn't grow up with a whole lot. He's always been an incredibly hard worker, and so for him it was always about letting us letting us pursue what we wanted without having to worry about the meeting just the bare necessities, right?
Mm.
And so um I mean, that being said, like I still had to fucking work my ass off and like, support myself in New York and all that. But just having them there being like, yeah, you can do this. We're not going to make you do anything else. Like I think I put more pressure on myself to make sure that I wasn't delusional than they did. But yeah, and then yeah, as time went on, it was just people in my life who sort of believed in me and were just like, hey, I'm just gonna like introduce you to this other person. I'm gonna like see, I'm gonna like send an email. And again, it's always kind of led in that direction. I've been really, really lucky in that way.
You're making your feature film debut in Fire Island. What has that transition been like for you, going from television and the stage to now film? And did anything surprise you about this experience?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because even my television experience is not extensive. So essentially it was just okay, basically purely being a stage actor and going into film. And everybody always says like, oh, it's about you have to find yourself being smaller, you have to find
Mhm.
yourself, your choices have to be a little different. I actually found like I felt so much more comfortable within the physical space of the camera, right? Of making the smaller choices. I was like, oh, this is kind of what I've been wanting to do this entire time. Filling a theater is sometimes more difficult. But what I found interesting is how much control you get. I think especially with a director like Andrew, who puts a lot of trust in you as a performer, you find that the choices you make are often the ones that make the cut, right? And so and he guides and he suggests and he just beautifully shapes what the final product is. But I think the thing that most surprised me is just how much I got to basically bring my own work to the table.
And speaking of Andrew, he said that many of the actors are playing versions of themselves, except for you. As an
Uh,
actor, is that more or less challenging?
well, it's funny. It's very kind of him to say that. But I think I don't. I think there's a version of me that is
Mm.
this character, right? It's very much like the everything everywhere all at once. Like if a couple nodes had been different, along the way, this could have been who I was. Um, but no, I mean, I think you always approach a character through yourself, right? And you always approach your character through the lens of the reality that you can convey, right? Like I can't, as in as much as this character is possible for me to look like, it is possible for me to be, right? And so yeah, I think you find the honesty in it, you find the truth in it, and it still sells. I mean, there were times where I was like, I don't know if I'm doing a ton of character work, right? Like this is just me approaching it from a very specific set of circumstances, and the rest just kind of falls into place.
Yeah, perfect. I go to this next question, but what was your character development process like as you were
Yeah,
preparing to step into his shoes, and how did you or were you able to approach him without judgment?
yeah. Well, I think it's kind of that it's that thing that we tend to say about villains, right? Is that every villain is the hero of their own story.
Yeah,
And I think it's no different here. I think you have to really identify, first of all, okay, what are the ways in which this person is sort of transgressing against uh, the mores of this society or this particular subculture, right? And that's the thing for any Mr. Wickham character, right? Is that he always sort of enters into this very um this structure, and he sort of like messes around with it,
mhm.
right? He sort of slips in between the gaps, and he comes in sort of from the outside. And um I think for this one, something that I've kind of said before is that one thing about queer culture, and about especially the very like sex positive culture that we're in right now, is that it is consent driven, right? It's what we say is, we're told, like whatever two or however many adults, whatever they want to do, as long as everyone is consenting, like let them do it, right? Like who are we to say? And I think for him to come in as a sex worker, right? And then swoop in and sort of violate that sacred space of consent. um Therein lies, okay, that's where his villainy is, right? That's
Yeah.
specifically where we get those feelings of just like, oh my god, like he this is not a good guy. And so I think for me, I had to say, okay, what leads to someone saying that this is okay, right? Because he can't come into this being like I'm an asshole, like do. And I think it just comes from a lot of little baby steps towards saying like, okay, like maybe Luke was he was under the influence of alcohol or drugs or whatever, but he still said yes, and so it's fine. I mean, there's a line in there that gives some sort of ambiguity
Mm.
to what the situation was that night, but at the same time, so you go from there. You say, okay, so he probably um you know didn't care that he wasn't completely sober, and so you go from there and you're like, okay, he's probably like posted a lot of these videos and just like assumes it's okay. I mean, again, there's a lot that people can start to think is okay when the repercussions don't hit them, right?
Yeah.
And I think going back to the question about sort of how do I find my way into this character, I think I was very lucky to have some reality checks very early in my development, early in my time into the city, in that you sort of learn, okay, this is the world that you're in, and you need to treat people with respect. And you need to be so hyper aware of what people are comfortable with, and what and what consent actually means, because it's been a huge conversation lately,
Yeah.
right? Like we've been not reframing, but we've been re-emphasizing, okay, uh like consent under the influence isn't necessarily consent, right? And so you have to really like think about these things, and play with them, and again, like this character, comes at it from a sense of not having had to have really thought about that critically. And so that kind of lets him swoop into that place. But yeah, it's I mean, it's a challenge, because it's also it's a very like bad thing what he does, and it's been
Yeah.
interesting to watch sort of the discourse around people being like there was a tweet where where someone was like he's trash, but girl, and the sort of the discourse around that people were like, oh my god, I can't believe you're like you could even consider. There's kind of an insidiousness to the character, in that like you do kind of want to be charmed by him, right? But at the end of the day, I mean, it's he's a trash person, truly a trash person.
Okay, and so you've also said in previous interviews that you found a lot of comfort being surrounded by your community on set. How did that ultimately translate to the choices that you made with your performance on screen?
Yeah. I think anytime you enter into a new project, you tend to you get those sort of like first day nerves of like, okay, how do I fit in? Like, what is my like, what am I giving talent wise? Am I going to make a complete fool of myself? Um, and I think what was really revelatory to me was how much of that was informed in the past um, by like straightness. I mean, I tend to play a lot of straight characters, and so you always kind of are worried, okay, like, are the choices that I'm making going to read straight enough? Like, am I going to am I convincingly playing this character? Like, am I convincingly giving this chemistry with whatever, um if I'm playing opposite a girl? And I think being able to get on set and realize that my gayness was not in any way going to be a hindrance towards playing this character was really cool. And really, and again, like, I felt like, I mean, there were some things that there were some takes that I did where I did like I was a little silly, like I did make some weird silly choices, and you sort of get on set with this particular cast who are all little silly billies, and you feel inspired to do that. And I think Andrew, I remember Andrew at one point being like, okay, like, dial that one back. But at the same time, like, I didn't feel I felt safe enough to do that. I felt safe enough to explore different parts of myself, like through this character, in those ways. Uh and yeah, so it was extremely helpful. And I keep on saying, it's like it was the perfect like post-pandemic job, because I did get to sort of get eased and gentled in with just like a group of amazing people, and people who I consider like really good friends now.
And like you were saying earlier, audiences have had a strong reaction to your character. How rewarding is that for you as an artist to see that the performance you've given has provoked this sort of kind of response and emotion?
Yeah, I mean, it's cool. And I think, I mean, it's a testament to Joel, first of all, for writing the character in the way that he did, because again, I do think it is such an interesting study on the insidiousness of whiteness in like all its forms. You see it, and you see it through basically like all of the white characters, right? And how they're able to navigate the space, and what sort of capital that whiteness always kind of holds even underneath the covers, right? And so yeah, so I mean, I think that has always been a goal for me, is that like I don't necessarily need to be part of the most prestigious things in the world, but I love being part of projects that have something to say. And I think Joel has like a tremendous amount to say, and he doesn't even have to like try, it just like comes out of him. And so being able to be a part of like his vision and Andrew's vision, is I feel incredibly grateful, and I feel incredibly grateful that people are seeing it and responding to it.
Yeah, it's gotten such a great response since its premiere on Hulu last
Yeah.
week. What do you
Yeah.
think is resonating most with audiences, and what do you personally hope they take away after they see it?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's it's kind of a combo of, one, it's incredibly honest. It gives, I mean, for me personally, and in the queer media that I've watched, which granted I don't consume a lot of content, but I try to. I try to keep up. I try to osmose. Um, to me, it was sort of the first thing that I've read. I mean, again, I read the script obviously, like about over a year ago. It was the first thing that I read where I was like, oh, this is actually how we talk to each other, and again, coming at this as like a queer man in New York, so there are some specificities to that, but like I had never seen that captured so brilliantly in terms of just like the sparkle and the joy and the bite and like the underlying hurt and all these different things that combine, and it's never presented as anything but normal, right? And that's what's really cool about Fire Island as a space, is that you get to go past all the things of saying like, all right, now this is a gay story. No, it's just a story that is taking place in a very like queer place. And so suddenly from there, you get to have these sort of these honest conversations and these honest relationships. And I think combined with that, it's the fact that we do have something sort of unprecedented in terms of how we're framing, these main characters, right? Again, we don't get to see um queer Asian men presented in this light. I mean, again, it feels unprecedented to me, but I think to have that as well, I think that's people are responding to the newness and the honesty, and the fact that it is also so just it's beautiful. I mean, it's comforting. Even if it's sort of like ambiguity of the ending and all that, but yeah, again, it like hits on all the things that a rom-com can do right, right, um which is giving you likable characters, um, you know, putting them through it, and then still seeing them discover something about themselves.
Great answer. And then outside of Fire Island, you had a breakout performance role in the CW's Legacies. Unfortunately, it's not coming back for
Yeah,
another season. When you look back at that experience, what will you remember most? And if you could share a message with fans of the show and fans of your fans, what would it be?
yeah. I'd say Legacies came at a really important time in my life, and that was again, like we're coming out of the pandemic, we're coming at a very transitional time for me in terms of trying to find like my purpose, and in terms of trying to find um how I sort of fit in this industry. And I think um what I'll remember most is just this feeling of being valued, right? I think that has helped inform so much of the spaces that I want to be in, right? Is that again, like I don't need to be winning awards. I mean, awards are always nice, but it's like if I can be in a space where I feel like what I bring to the table is appreciated, and people like who I am as a person, and like what I do, then that is where I want to be, and that is exactly how I felt on that set. Like I felt extremely um, just appreciated, and and in turn, like I loved, like the vibes were so good, the cast was like so welcoming and so loving, and I felt like I really got a chance to feel at home, in a way that even in New York I didn't get a chance to. And so that was really, really special. And then I think yeah, for the fans, I'm like, you know I- again, I think they really resonated with seeing queer characters put
Yeah.
in situations like this. I think that was like so just it again, there's something so inherently powerful about seeing queerness on screen, right?
Mhm.
And so I think um yeah, I guess my message to them is just keep on supporting like queer creators, because that's how we get more of it. We love to see queer characters, but I think celebrating the people who are behind it, who are, making this content. I think that is what is really going to make the change, and that is what is really going to help us, right, as queer performers, be able to have more things to do, and more more spaces to inhabit. And like, I love it. Like, I love that, in my career so far, I've gotten to play like a kind of diverse set of characters already, in terms of personality types and their approaches to the
Mm.
world. And it's fun for me. It's fun that I don't have to just sit in one box, that I can kind of roam and still, yeah. So that's my message. Support queer creators.